Hi everyone, thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're just going to get started with our workshop today as we wait for more folks to join us in the next few minutes. But just some few instructions as we'll be sharing this space in this virtual Zoom room today. Marian and I will be presenting and sharing our screens for most parts of this workshop, and we'll be facilitating a Q&A towards the end and hopefully kind of get you folks involved in a dialogue. This session will be recorded. So feel free to turn off your camera and mic if you don't want to be recorded in this video recording, and whatever is most comfortable for you today. And just to regulate this space as well, if you would like to speak or comment, feel free to pop that in the chat anytime. Or raise your hand using the raise hand function, and we'll invite you to unmute yourselves just to prevent us from talking over each other, as I'm sure most of you might be familiar with teaching in classes already. And so we just want to start today's workshop by acknowledging that these learning modules have been developed, and the work that we'll be sharing about today is done on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam people at the University of British Columbia on what is dominantly known as Vancouver here in British Columbia, Canada. And so for Marian and myself as students and settlers on these lands, we believe that a critical part of engaging in equitable food justice pedagogy is centering Indigenous histories in our teaching and learning practices. And so within the context of this workshop, acknowledging these lands is an important first step to furthering the work that we'll be exploring and discussing today. And with the content that we'll be presenting on, if you are a settler, we encourage you to question how you as an educator, your learners, your communities have benefited and continue to benefit from being on Indigenous lands today. And in using this resource, we hope that you will continue to think about how you can center Indigenous sovereignty, self-determination, voices, stories, and communities in delivering the various learning modules that we'll be introducing today. And so because we have a really short time together, we still want to kind of know who's in the room with us. And I'm going to invite all of you to just introduce yourself in the chat with your names, whose lands you're calling in from today, and why you are here. And so we're going to move on with the workshop, but feel free to just pop that in the chat anytime throughout the workshop. So I'm going to hop onto the agenda for our workshop today. We're going to start by providing a brief review of how this project came to be and where we're at now. We'll also be doing a really quick run through of the website. Marian will be leading a case study, kind of looking at how to navigate one of the learning modules. And then we'll be opening up the floor for a Q&A session and wrap up in the last 5 minutes. And if you have any question at any point of time, please feel free to share that in the chat as well. Next slide, please. So I want to start by introducing the both of us. My name is Rachel. I'm a fourth year human geography student here at UBC. And I was involved in this summer actually in developing some of the modules, refining activities, as well as having the opportunity to illustrate and design the workshop, the website and the activity handouts for this project. I'm also currently the creative communications lead at UBC Climate Hub, and have been involved in various housing, climate, and disability justice. And my interest in climate justice, equity pedagogy, and climate storytelling really drew me to be involved and to join a team for this project.
My name is Marian Corkery, and I'll be also leading this workshop with Rachel. I'm a recent graduate from the Global Resource Systems program and have been with this project, I guess, for almost the last 2 years. So it's really exciting to get to a point where we're actually being able to share what we've been working on. So I do a lot of the project coordinating, task managing, and kind of been through different iterations of this project and working on the modules in different capacities. And then I actually just started with Farm to School BC as a community animator in the Vancouver area region. Okay, so now we'll get into a bit about the background of the project and how it started and how it's changed and where we're at now, just to give a bit of context for the actual modules. So this process makes it look very linear, which it was very much not, but just for sake of simplicity and timing, we'll just start with this. So this is kind of an overview and I'll unpack it a little bit. So the roots of this project really came from a student-led desire for our education to interrogate the injustices that we saw within the food system and didn't feel it was necessarily represented as much in our education as we wanted to. So myself, Joyce, and Colin Dring, who's actually on this call as well, started this 2 years ago when we applied for the Teaching and Learning Enhancement Fund. with the Faculty of Land and Food Systems. So then to kind of, once we got that funding, we're like, okay, how do we start? And we started by looking at other food justice courses in the United States and Canada and just seeing what the landscape was, what was the pedagogy, what was currently being employed. And then we also got to interview instructors, which was amazing just to hear what food justice looks like in a classroom setting, as opposed to an activist or other setting. So we also did a scan of UBC courses that use food to kind of see what opportunities are there for embedding food justice and other understandings within existing courses. And then the module creation. So from that food justice scan, we developed which topics we wanted to talk about, which ones we wanted to really hone in on. So there was writing and researching the background, creating learning outcomes, designing and finding activities, and making suggested assessments. And then after that, we trialed. And again, this was not linear in any sense. We were creating as we were trialing, we were revising as this was happening, and just really developing and figuring out what kind of gaps in our own knowledge as a student-led team, what are other understandings that we need to incorporate. But the majority of the trialing happened in the student-directed seminar that myself and Joyce Lau led, I guess it was a year ago now, with Rachel in the seminar, as well as 12 other students who were in upper year courses. We also trialed in LFS 350 and GRS 290 and 390, as well as community workshops. And I think this was an awesome opportunity to not only just test out these modules that we've been working on for over a year, but also to get other students to test them out. Because our assumption was that if students who didn't have the same pedagogical background as instructors or same experiences could take what we'd worked on, then they'd be applicable in other settings and other people would be able to approach them. That was something we were definitely thinking about, is what is the accessibility, how will people approach these, and it really influenced our how we created the modules and how we changed them from there. And then revising. So again, this was happening all throughout as we were trialing and creating the modules. So we got feedback from an amazing project team, different consultants, and these are all listed on the website. So I'll let you folks look at all those names, and a lot of them are in the room right now, which is really exciting to see. So yeah, and then from the student-directed seminar, we refined them quite a bit. And then compiling. So it was really important to us to have them open source, Creative Commons, so that way people outside of an academic context could access this. When we talk about justice, what does that mean in terms of accessibility online? So that was a big thing that we wanted to focus on, and especially with the push for open educational resources, that was huge to be able to incorporate in this project. So that's the goal of this, is to be able for people to reuse, remix, revise them in any way that they see fit. So it was quite a big project to undertake as a student team, and we had an amazing opportunity to work with a lot of different people at UBC and outside of UBC, as well as a lot of other students who have been involved in the project in different capacities. So some of our guiding principles, this is from the facilitator guide that is also available on the website. The facilitator guide offers a lot more resources to be able to try and uphold these guiding principles, but I'll just go through them, and you can also look on the website for more details. So the first one is uphold lived and personal experiences. And this can be done by centering marginalized voices while not further burdening and fostering awareness of emotional reactions. The second guiding principle is addressing power dynamics in the learning environment. So using the physical environment as a way to model different power dynamics, share responsibilities, and leadership within the classroom. Fostering a community of learners by co-creating community guidelines, writing a food justice manifesto, and holding each other accountable. So within the facilitator guide, there's a lot more resources to be able to do this, because I think when people talk about teaching food justice, there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of self-reflection that has to go into that beforehand. So that was kind of our goal with the facilitator guide, was to provide resources and different activities and other work that people have already done to be able to prepare people to be able to teach food justice or to engage with these complex and nuanced topics. And I think something we realized, especially being students and being relatively new to learning and teaching about food justice, was you'll never feel ready, you'll never know enough. So the facilitator guide is kind of trying to mitigate that by providing you opportunities to engage with this material and to get to a point where you're at least ready to take that first step, because you'll never feel 100% ready to engage in these really hard discussions and really hard learning opportunities, but they're so necessary. So I guess in reflection, now that we're at the end of the project and we're kind of putting these learning modules out into the world, these learning modules are not comprehensive by any means. There's so many different ways you can approach food justice, and this is just one of them, and is designed to kind of be that first step. So they were never supposed to be perfect, and they never will be. They're still going through some final revisions, but this is kind of our offering from this project into the world, and hope that instructors and educators and other people can engage with them in many different ways and adapt them to their settings. It was a student-driven project, so there are both strengths to that, and that we can say, well, would we be able to understand this? Is this accessible to us as post-secondary students? But there are also limitations to that, and we were really blessed to work with a really strong project team, but there's, again, not perfect. And because this is a 2-year project through the Teaching and Learning Enhancement Fund, at this point we are able to get feedback, but we can't change things too much. So we definitely welcome feedback from today and are excited to see what people think as we're kind of putting this out into the world, but there are some limitations in that. So now I'm gonna pass it off to Rachel, who's gonna kind of orient us to the website and share her screen, so that way we can go through it a bit, and then we'll go back to do an actual case study of how would you approach one module and how might you be able to use it.
Awesome, thanks, Marin. So I believe folks should be able to see my screen. Is it showing well, Marin?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So this is the website. It's justfood.learnfood.ubc.ca. And so this is the homepage where we kind of begin by providing a brief overview of the Just Food project. The target audience or the target user of this resource is very much food justice educators, but we also included a small section here for students or learners who are interested in bringing a module or modules into their classrooms. We have provided an email template for students to also be able to advocate for more food justice content in their curriculum. And these learning modules are also very much, they can also very much be taken on as self-directed learning materials. And then we provided a brief overview of the project and just some really simple instructions on how to navigate the site. So we began by learning about the project, its origins, and the faces behind it, checking out the facilitator guide for resources to support the delivery of modules, viewing L7 learning modules, starting with the food justice primer, and then encouraging users or educators to scale, scope, and adapt a variety of readings and activities to their classrooms. And so, as Marin mentioned, the Just Food project was born from a place of students wanting our education to center issues of injustice that we were witnessing or learning about in our daily lives. And so apart from Marin and myself, there were 4 other students, Joyce, Farron, Graham, and Samantha, that we just want to acknowledge here today, who played a huge role in creating this resource, along with Colin, during a PhD student who's here with us today, and Professor Will Valley, both from the Faculty of Land and Food Systems. And so these modules are the result of an iterative process with many revisions and consultations with experts, food educators, and communities along the way that you can check out here on the website. And so jumping into the facilitator guide, this is where we would highly encourage educators to start in terms of using the resources or the learning modules. This facilitator guide provides useful tools to examine your own positionality as an educator or facilitator and ensure that you have the background to be able to facilitate these topics. The guide also provides pedagogical tools, frameworks, and resources that will be helpful in approaching the modules through an equity lens or supporting the delivery of the modules. And so you can see here the guiding principles, it expands on what positionality means and different tips for addressing classroom dynamics, some instructions on how to use the modules, and other resources. And feel free to explore this page in your own time after this workshop, because I think there are a ton of really good information here. And then we move on to the learning modules page. And here you can see 7 learning modules that we have developed over the past 2 years that you as an educator can integrate into your curriculum or your classroom. And so we encourage you to use what is appropriate in your context, in your curriculum, or whether you're leaning towards a particular topic. We also want to preface that these modules can be considered somewhat a work in progress. So do use them as a starting point to build off your teaching content. And so Marin will be elaborating in a bit on how to navigate each module. So I won't go into that right now. And then we have a glossary page. So these are just a compilation of terms that are used and included throughout the modules. And you can use this search bar here to search terms for definitions or for resources that we've included for some of them. And recognizing that there are a ton of jargon that might be used in this resource because it is targeted at post-secondary students. This glossary page is really to hopefully to ensure that learners and facilitators of varying knowledge and backgrounds will be able to kind of catch up on these definitions in an accessible manner. And then lastly, we have the contact us page. And so if you have any questions about the project, if you'd like to provide feedback and changes, if you're looking to get more involved in further iterations of this resource, or even if you just want to share your experience adapting this resource in your own setting, we would really love to hear from you. And so on the website, please feel free to use this form below to reach out to us anytime.
So we thought that we would take you through what a sample module looks like and how they can be adapted. I think this was both the challenge and the blessing of this project is that we wanted to make this broad enough that it could be applicable in a lot of different settings and to a lot of different instructors. So there's a lot of different things that you can pick and choose from as they fit in your context and as they already apply to your existing courses, or if you're building new courses or just looking for new activities. So there's definitely a lot here and it can be adapted in different ways. So I'll just go through the food justice primers. That's a good place to start if maybe you need some more foundational topics or just understandings. This is hopefully accessible to a lot of different people, but there might also be some topics that if you're teaching in a sociology sense, like folks might already have engaged with some of this. So it's definitely, like we said, it does a lot, but it's up to you to discern what's kind of the best for your learners or within your context as a community member or wherever you're trying to adapt these modules. So the food justice primer is also a bit different than the other modules in that it's a bit longer just because we did want to kind of span that range. So I'll show you how some of the activities are more for introductory. And then if people are already engaged in food systems work, some of the other activities are a better fit. So we'll just go through this. And also if there's any questions at any point, I can't see the chat very well, but feel free to unmute yourself and just ask as we go. So here's the introduction. Each module has a brief introduction, just going over the topic. So this one kind of just provides an introduction to food justice as a whole. I won't read through any of this, but feel free to look at the module online and do some reading yourself too. So then we have learning outcomes. There's usually about 3 to 4 learning outcomes with each learning module. And these are really to guide what you're trying to get out of the session and what you want your learners to get out of the session. And I should add that these modules can be adapted to work in like a 90-minute class setting, but you can also pick and choose more learning outcomes or pick and choose more activities to fill longer sessions. Then each module has a background. That's about 1,500 to 2,000 words, just to provide a brief overview. This is based on some of the readings that we've selected. And so this one goes over topics of food injustice, positionality and intersectionality, equity versus equality, power and justice, food security, and food sovereignty, allies and accomplices. And it just kind of provides an overview to give learners some basic background that they'll work through more in their readings. And then we have the key terms. So these are the same ones that are in the glossary that are just specific to this module, and they're linked throughout the module. So if there's any jargon, we've tried to link it back to the key terms so that they're all defined. And then we have our activities. So like I said, this module is a lot longer than the other ones. So I believe we actually have about 10 activities in this one. Most of the other modules have about 3 to 5 activities, at least one for each learning outcome to link up with those. And we have some notes here. So just to preface this, a lot of these activities were designed before COVID happened and before online learning and teaching was the norm. So that's not to say that these activities won't work in an online setting, but there are some that are more general than the current reality we're in. So we have that in the activity notes. Like for example, this activity requires physical space or that kind of thing. So you can look at this overview to kind of figure out which one would be the best fit for you. And so we have an estimated time with each of them, the associated learning outcomes, and these notes. And then each one is linked to a PDF. So it would normally open in a new tab, but I already have some of them loaded just for ease in this session. So we recommend that with each module, you start with group guidelines of creating a learning space that is open for everyone. And ideally, these can be co-created. So all of our activities follow this amazing template that Rachel developed. It looks very snazzy. I love it and love the color scheme. So each one has a purpose, description, any facilitator notes or things to consider before you approach this activity, the materials and time estimate. And then some of them have different options for modifications. So we do recommend that you would try and read through the whole PDF before you get started. We did test these out and trial them and try to make them as easy to use as possible, but it's just a good disclaimer with any activity you're approaching. So for this one, we have different options based on time. So we have an option for a 20 to 30 minute group guideline, a 10-minute, and a 5-minute. So depending on your context, like if you're working with people over the span of months, then it would be really great to develop group like guidelines together and make sure that they're flexible and fluid. But if you're only here for an hour together, then a 5-minute group guideline might be a better fit. So that's something that's in all of the modules is we have this activity. And then the other activity that's also in the other modules is a reading discussion. So you'll see this template used for all of the other reading discussions that has a bit of a flow chart for different ways that you could approach the discussion. It includes some facilitator notes. And for each one we have, I'm just gonna skip through all the instructions for the actual discussion because it's a bit finer detail. But for each learning outcome, we've identified 3 to 4 readings, and we've tried to make these both academic as well as more accessible, like newspaper articles or videos or something like that. That was something when we did the Student Directed Seminar that students really appreciated, was having that, that option to choose. Yeah, so you'll see in this one, there's different options across the range for all of the different learning outcomes. So we recommend that you would choose 1 reading per learning outcome ideally. And then we also have suggested assessments. We didn't spend as much time building out the assessments because in our experience and with other courses that we looked at, a lot of the assessments aren't as flexible, like they're like how they assess, how you assign assignments as an educator is a lot of thought goes into that. So we just wanted to offer what an option could be and then let instructors and educators decide what works for them. So often we have a couple of different options. And there's a space for notes for if you wanted to print this off. And then everything is Creative Commons licensed, so we have that at the bottom. So with this module, I'm not going to go through all of the activities as there is 8 more that we could go through. So I'll just go through a couple. So for example, we have the Flower Power, which is one that we've adapted, and we have the links to it. And then again, it has all the steps and everything. So this kind of shows like the level of detail that goes into each activity. So we really hope it's something that educators could pick up. And some of them include useful definitions for reference, that kind of thing. So it really is ready to go. And then another example that we found really impactful in the seminar as well was the DOT activity, which was modified from PeerNet, which is a movement-based activity. I would love to see someone try and replicate this in an online activity because it requires closing your eyes and putting a dot on your face. I think some of the people here have been in a workshop that we led with that. But so this one may not be that great in a pandemic setting, but in the future, it would be a great activity to look at different forms of power. And then a lot of them have discussion questions and debrief questions embedded throughout the activities. And then I wanted to showcase this example as well, because this kind of shows how some of them are for learners who are at different stages. So for this, contrasting orientations of food security, food sovereignty, and food justice, it's kind of a 2-part activity where students could use the beginning part if they're new to these topics, but if they've already been engaging with food justice or food systems and this kind of work, they could do the second part. So we've included a pre-activity and then activity part 1. So this is just defining different terms in a collective way, and then doing kind of crowdsourcing information, and then having learners decide which one they would like to take on. So this kind of shows how, again, these are really adaptable and fluid, and we want it to kind of be a source of inspiration for educators to choose what would work best in their context. But there's many different ways they can be adapted. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of one of the modules. Was there any specific questions on the food justice primer in general? It was kind of just a brief overview to orient folks.
No questions, but just wanted to provide some encouragement that this looks awesome.
Okay. Thank you. Great. Okay. That's a good question, Claire. There are definitely some activities that would work better, but we haven't really pulled those out. So within the activity notes, there are some that like stipulate when you need a physical space, or if you need a different setting or that kind of thing, or if there's any pre-work that needs to be done, but we haven't actually pulled that out. That would be an interesting thing to kind of add on. It's like, for pandemic times, these are the best activities to use.
This is Judy here. Kara just asked a question. Judy here. I'm just wondering, how has it been used in some, what type of situation has been, classroom has it been used, and how's the students' reaction to this?
So we've used them in both like the classroom setting and the student-directed seminar, which was Joyce and I like leading, and then also other students facilitating, which I acknowledge is kind of a different kind of setting than a lot of classrooms, but I think that was an interesting opportunity of showing what you can just give students and how to kind of democratize the learning environment. So I think a lot of like the reading discussions and that kind of thing are designed to be kind of student-led activities. Then we also did a workshop in GRS, which is a group of like 20 to 30 students. And we did kind of a version of some of the food justice primer activities, including the dot activity, and then an activity around food justice and the different forms of food justice. And then we've also done a couple of community workshops. We did one with the UBC Farm Practicum, and then also with, I think it was the Richmond Diversity Symposium, again with some of the primer materials and adapting them to different settings. And then we also with LFS 350 did them in a tutorial setting. So I think the tutorial settings are nice because I think a lot of these activities do lend themselves to smaller groups. Like a lot of these topics would be hard to bring up if you have like 200 people in a class and aren't able to provide space to actually unpack some of these concepts. But yeah, thanks for the question, Judy. Any other questions or anything I can go back to and kind of highlight more?
I'm just gonna... Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go.
I was going to say, I know you mentioned obviously that this had a time limit and everything on this project. I'm curious if you have something in particular that if you have more time or more funds, if you feel like there's a next step to this that is what you will be passionate about adding to the scheme?
Yeah, there are a couple ideas that we're throwing around right now that we might be able to do just in the time we have left, and that's one is going back and adding kind of intersectionality box or something, just to be really explicit of how we've approached these things in kind of somewhat narrow ways of like, we've defined the food justice primer, we've defined migrant labor, but these things all interact. Like when we talk about gender, there's that influences other modules as well. So I think that's one thing we're looking at going back and adding, is just being more explicit about how these different topics interact with each other. I think, and this is something we might ask you folks later too, is like, what could the next module be? Like what other topics do people want or feel that they need to take a kind of a justice lens or an equity lens to and understand from different perspectives. Because we chose these modules, like we have the 7 modules because of the research that we did and what we found was necessary, but I feel like there's a lot of other ones. So yeah, I don't know if there's, Rachel, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Not really. I think, yeah, that was definitely one of the questions we wanted to put out today to see if there was interest in any particular topics beyond the 7 modules that are currently available.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. I think there was someone else who had a question at the same time.
Yes, that was me. So first, congratulations to the whole team. It's such an exciting and excellent compilation of and organization and co-creation of really meaningful resources. And I can already anticipate how I might use some of these in my classes. And I wonder if there's and I'm sorry if I missed this, but I wonder if there's a kind of dynamic portion of the site where you might be interested in collecting feedback or adaptations that people were, came up with as they use these resources.
Yeah, so we do have the contact us form, which if folks use it, then it'll get emailed to one of us. So we would love to hear how people use it. I might not have explicitly stated this, but all of the backend material is through the UBC Wiki. So people at UBC can add to the wiki in that sense, and we're working on getting them put on the UBC Open Case Studies as well. So if somebody made their own food justice module following a similar format, or somebody took some of these activities that we made or some of the ways we compiled things, then there is a way to embed it on the UBC Wiki. So I think that would be kind of the main way, and then through that contact us form as well.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I think something that we're curious is, like, Yona, you mentioned how you could see yourself adapting some of these. Is there anyone else who maybe would like to talk about how they would adapt it? I think we're kind of, we have ideas and develop this in a certain way, but we would love to hear either Yona or someone else how, which ones you're drawn to or how you might adapt them.
I can start off and just share a little bit. I apologize if there's background noise. My 5-year-old is here with me.
That's totally fine.
So I teach in a class that's one of our kind of intro to food systems classes in the new food systems, nutrition and health major at the UW. And it has focused more on community food systems, but we've really started to expand the discussion from community food security through to food justice and food sovereignty. And so I was really drawn to that activity and would just have to think about, how to do it on Zoom, what elements I could bring out. But we also have discussion sections, or the equivalent of tutorials, where students can work in small groups in normal circumstances, and maybe even in the breakout rooms on Zoom. Yeah. So I'm sure there are more opportunities as well to use the resources, but I was drawn to that because I have a lecture titled Food Security, Food Justice, Food Sovereignty. So, and I've, come up with my own activities, and I'm really interested in how they intersect with the ones that you've put together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of the activities and talking about it and thinking about it more makes me think of how it would be applied in an online setting. A lot of them do require some kind of mapping or some kind of sticky notes, that kind of participatory thing, which works great in person and then can also be modified to a Zoom context, whether that's using the Zoom whiteboard or using some of the online platforms. Yeah, that's awesome to hear, Yona. Thanks for sharing. Does anybody else want to share or any thoughts on what they're drawn to? Thanks for sharing, Claire. Yeah, I think that's kind of our hope as well, is that these won't just be in an academic context, is that they can be applied across a lot of settings. Yeah, since we do have some time, if folks wanted to just spend a few minutes to look through the website themselves, we can stay on for a bit. And then if you spend 5 minutes kind of poking around the website and want to come back and ask questions, Rachel and I will be here. But yeah, I think we're also okay to wrap it up a bit early if folks got what they need out of the session already.
Hi. It's not something that is the focus of my current research, but it just struck me as, I guess, an area that I see to be increasingly important to think about sort of generational justice, and then, animal labor and interspecies or multi-species justice moving forward. So I don't know if that is potentially within the scope of this project moving forward, or if you've considered that, or otherwise have any resources you would point me to.
Yeah, I think that comes up a little bit in the Agriculture as a Colonial Project module, just talking about like more than human relationships and that kind of thing, but that isn't something we really touch on that much. So I don't know if that's in the scope of this project, or if someone else will see this and kind of get inspired to make their own module on that, because I think that would be a really interesting module, and definitely something that is becoming more and more pertinent, especially like the pandemic and everything. So yeah, that's really cool. Thanks for offering that.
Thanks for all the work your team has done. It looks awesome. Looking forward to using it.
Thanks.
So with folks who are still with us, we're just gonna pop the link to our survey in a chat right now. So Marion and I and Colin will be doing a few more of these workshops to kind of introduce this resource to more people within the community. And so we would love to hear your feedback on the workshop or their website in general. And so there's a link to the survey right now in the chat. It shouldn't take you more than 3 minutes. So if you want to just do that, that'll be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just, it's Claire here. I'm just clicking around on the website a little bit. And it just looks so great. Like the amount of work you've done. And so it's just incredible. And I was looking at like the local food page, and it's like, wow, look at all this stuff. So thank you so much. It's really exciting to have this. And I know it's been a lot of work, and other people have been congratulating you. So I just want to echo that. And yeah, and also thank you for this presentation. Super helpful. So
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you.
yeah, it's awesome.
Okay, well, if there's not any other questions or thoughts, then we can probably wrap things up now, but we'll put the contact us page in the chat as well. So if there is something that comes up, just feel free to send us an email through that, or you can send an email directly to me if that's easier. So I'll put that in the chat as well. But thank you all for coming and for listening. And yeah, it feels really great to just be able to put this out into the world, and we look forward to hearing how people use and adapt and remix the resources.
Thanks, everyone.